What your name is and who you with?
Steve Sullivan, spokesperson for Millennium Pipeline Company.
Okay, and we are here today set the scene. Where are we?
Sure. We're at the Hancock Middle School, High School, where we're having an informational open house about the proposed Hancock Compressor Station project to provide the community an opportunity to learn more about the proposed Millennium Hancock Compressor Station project. The purpose of this project is to increase throughput of natural gas on the line. The whole northeast region of the country is increasing its demand for natural gas because we're replacing dirtier coal boilers and oil boilers, and actually it's having a profoundly positive effect on clean air. There's an article out just this past weekend in Financial Times magazine that documented that we're seeing significant improvements in our regional air quality because of the increased use of natural gas. So this project is intended to increase the throughput while having the minimal environmental impact. The other alternative would be to put another line in. Rather than do that, we increase the amount of pressure on the line so we have more gas that can be transported along the existing line.
And then what's the level of pressure in the Millennium right now, and then what will it go to after this?
The current pressure is 800 pounds per square inch, and this will increase it to about 1,200 pounds per square inch.
And then what's the design of the Millennium? What's the max capacity of the Millennium?
1,200.
1,200. So we're taking it to the max right now.
Taking it to the permitted level.
Permitted level.
Which is different than the max it could contain. There's engineering standards that allow for much more than that.
Okay. So this compressor station is just going to be in line in the Millennium. It's just
correct. What it'll do is it'll take natural gas. It'll be powered by natural gas, so it'll be a very clean facility. And it will tap natural gas off of the line to run essentially a turbine, similar to what you might see on a jet airplane. And that'll increase the pressure and thereby the throughput on the line.
So, and the horsepower of the motors driving the turbine is
15,000 horsepower.
15,000.
Correct.
Wow.
Just to put that in perspective, a megawatt. A lot of people are familiar with a megawatt of electricity. Mm-hmm. A megawatt of electricity is about 13,600 horsepower.
So it's around a megawatt.
Yeah, a little bit more than a megawatt of electricity.
A megawatt engine.
Yes.
And so it seems like some of the people, some of the residents nearby, they're concerned about noise. Can you speak about noise at all?
Sure. Under Federal Energy Regulatory Commission guidelines, we are required to adhere to noise regulations, and they are 55 decibels at the nearest sensitive point. So that would be the nearest home would have to have noise levels no higher than 55 decibels, which is equivalent roughly to a refrigerator running in your home. And then, as you know, noise falls off as a function of the square root of distance. So as you go any distance further, that noise drops very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Is that across all frequency ranges? Because it seems like that low frequency rumble might transmit. I think about thunderstorms have that low frequency.
Yeah, I'm not a noise expert,
okay.
So I don't want to comment on. But as I understand it, this should not produce low frequency noise, this station.
Okay, and so you mentioned about the. Let me just think for 1 second. You mentioned about the noise regulations. Is that a federal regulation?
Yes.
I see FERC is here. So
yes.
It implies like a federal. What makes this a federal jurisdiction?
This is what's called a interstate pipeline. And all interstate pipelines in the U.S. are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Okay.
They have oversight authority for all the permitting that goes on with these types of facilities. So because this is part of that infrastructure, they have jurisdictional authority.
And then what are the states? Because I thought the Millennium, it's all in New York, isn't it?
It is, but it's the type of pipeline, and it's interconnected to interstate pipelines. So
okay.
it is qualified as an interstate pipeline.
Okay.
Yes.
And is there any, are there any, because that started me thinking about the federal jurisdiction, is there any state regulations of this pipeline, or even is there any opportunity for the local municipality to regulate in any way?
No, this is a federally regulated pipeline. If we were in wetlands, the Army Corps might be involved, and they delegate some authority to the DEC. But that's not the case with this project. So this is strictly a federally regulated project.
Okay.
Now,
so-
now, I should say, we try and work very closely with the towns. In this particular case, we've talked to supervisors from towns across this area and tried to gauge receptiveness and wanted to work with towns, and there was a fair level of receptiveness from this town as far as citing the project here.
So does the town, I mean, if it's purely a federal jurisdiction, why did you have to go to the town boards at all? Why did, or is it just like out of a courtesy?
We want to be a good neighbor, and we want to, part of these projects is you propose a project and then you try and refine it to make it a better and better project. And the way you do that is by receiving input from the local community. And so we think that's very important to engage in that dialogue and find out what's important to people.
And that's the purpose of this today.
Exactly.
I think some people, in fact me, I mean, I've been going around, traveling around to going to a lot of meetings like this. I was more expecting kind of like a presentation rather than,
sure.
What would you call this kind of a format?
We call this an informational open house with stations.
Stations, yeah.
And there's a very specific purpose to that, is that generally people have specific questions or want to find out about specific information and may not want to sit through a 2-hour presentation about all kinds of information that they're really not interested in. In this sort of format, it's more informal. People aren't intimidated. They can come, they can find out about what they're concerned about, and then go on their way. Everybody's busy these days, and hopefully we try and maximize people's time by doing it in this format, and make people feel a little bit more comfortable. Then, often people, if you're in a big setting with a town hearing or something, people might be reluctant to stand up and they have a legitimate question. This way they can approach one person and get their question answered in a non-threatening environment.
Okay. Does the state or the local community derive any tax revenue or any other kind of revenue from the state? Could you talk about that?
Yes. With projects such as these, almost across the board now, they're done under pilot agreements with the county IDA, Industrial Development Agency. So there will be a negotiated pilot, and that will provide tax revenue to the county as well as to the locality. In addition, outside of the pilot, there is taxing jurisdictions, special taxing jurisdictions. In this case, the local fire department is a special taxing jurisdiction. So they will receive taxes at full assessment.
So we're talking about maybe property taxes that help benefit the local fire?
Property tax, well, yes, the local fire department will have an annual budget, and people in that district have been paying for that local budget, will now be a significant contributor to that budget. And so that should reduce people's, depending on how the fire department decides to use their additional revenue, that should ease the financial burden on local residents.
So we're talking about property taxes. Is there any revenue based on the gas that's going through?
Not in this case. There have been agreements in other areas where their pilot is based upon the throughput on the line, but that's not the case here.
Now you mentioned the IDAs and you mentioned a negotiated pilot. I don't really understand that. Can you help explain? What does that mean, a negotiated pilot? What's a pilot?
A pilot is a payment in lieu of taxes. With facilities such as this, shopping malls, major infrastructure projects, if they were to pay full assessed value of taxes, they just wouldn't be built. It would be too prohibitive. And so what's emerged as state of the art over the past 15 years is that an agreement is worked out between an industrial development agency, in this case the Delaware County Industrial Development Agency, that you pay what is essentially taxes, but the taxes are under this pilot agreement. So what happens is you'll get similar projects just as you would when pricing perhaps a house, and you come to what would be a fairly assessed value for a project such as this.
So the pilot is really more like a tax abatement. It's like it's a negotiated reduction in property taxes, because if it was the full price, it would be
it would not be built.
Gotcha. Okay.
It would, so.
And then, so what about the timeline of this project? Are we still like in the early stages?
Yes, we're in, we've entered into what's called the pre-filing phase at the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And the idea is to do a lot of outreach, to get a lot of input from the local community, so you can fashion an even better application when you file the formal application with the FERC. We expect this process, the pre-filing process, to extend through about the fall, at which time we would file a formal permit with the FERC. They would review that. It tends to, when you do the pre-filing process, it tends to expedite the formal filing process. We would hope the end of this year, early next year, to obtain a permit, and if everything went well, we would begin construction spring of 2013. There would be a 6 to 7 month construction process with a payroll of about $12 million, a labor payroll of about $12 million, hiring 75 to 90 workers, many of which will be local. We're working with some of the local labor unions. And then if everything went well, this facility would go online in November 2013.
November, so a little more than a year from now, year and a half.
Yeah, year and a half, approximately, okay. Yes.
So, and the reason is because that's, going through all the different regulatory things and then the actual construction time.
Yes, yes. The regulatory end of the process is pretty intensive. We have to adhere to a lot of criteria as far as examining soils, examining socioeconomic impacts, examining air quality. We have to go through intensive review by the FERC before any shovel goes into the ground. So we're in that process now, and as I say, we're trying to receive feedback from the local community to make the best project possible that works for everybody involved.
So when was the Millennium originally built? It was like 98, something like that?
2008,
oh,
it came online.
Yeah. 2008, okay.
Yes.
So, and it's a 30-inch pipeline?
Correct.
It's a 30-inch. So
it runs from approximately Corning, New York, down into Rockland County.
Okay. And so, one of my questions is, why, if it was designed for certain capacity, why is it that these compression, because there's another one that's going on in Minnesink, right?
Correct,
Minnesink?
correct.
So, why now the need for, does this have, I guess one of the questions is, does this have anything to do with local Marcellus production?
It has to do with local Marcellus production, but it also has to do with the general increase in the use of gas. If you look at the profile of electric power plants in the past 10 to 15 years, almost all new capacity that's come online for electric generation is one of two technologies. It's either natural gas or wind technology. We're coming up with solar. But those are the two technologies, largely because of their environmental profile. Natural gas electric generation tends to be, depending on the emittant, tends to be between 90 and 95% cleaner than a comparable coal facility.
Wow.
So, as I said earlier, we're seeing dramatic increases or dramatic improvements in air quality, regional air quality. It's sort of this hidden secret that a lot of people aren't aware of. But that's driven largely because of this changeover to natural gas. Now, with the changeover comes significantly increased demand. Some of it is coming from the Marcellus Shale region, but it's coming from other regions as well.
But the supply is coming from, you're talking about demand. The supply, is this having to do with servicing the supply from the Marcellus? That's
a portion, but it comes from Canada, it comes from the Gulf of Mexico, it comes from a number of regions, so it's multifaceted.
The source of the gas in the Millennium comes from all those places?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, yeah. When the Millennium Pipeline was built, there was no, people did not know about the Marcellus gas situation. And so it was built entirely without any recognition of that reserve.
Now there's a new pipeline going from like Susquehanna County up to Schoharie County, the Constitution?
There's a few proposed ones. I believe Williams Company has proposed one. I believe El Paso has proposed one. Right now they're in the proposal stages.
So is this facility in any way connected to that Constitution pipeline at all?
No.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything.
Well, one thing I would say is it's a significant infrastructure project. We're talking about a $37 million infrastructure total capital budget,
wow.
Of which, as I said, about $12 million is labor payroll. So it's not insignificant at all, and yet the footprint is about 2 to 3 acres. There's about 1,300. There are about 1,300 of natural gas compressor stations around the country currently operating. Very few of them are being designed with the high technology of these. For instance, you'll see a lot of compressor stations that have the piping and the compressors out in the open air. We've gone to great lengths to try and make these as benign as possible, and that includes putting them in insulated buildings, designing the buildings so that they look as if they are part of the region. If you look at the renderings that we've created, they tend to look like barns, and that's meant to both aesthetically be as least intrusive as possible, but to reduce noise and any other impacts.
I just thought of something that some of the local people were talking about. People were concerned about, I mean, noise, we talked about the noise, but they also were concerned about like maybe air emissions, and even, I didn't know this, but somebody told me, maybe you can tell me, it might not be true, but somebody told me that the compressor itself is a consumptive user of water.
No.
It's not?
No, it is
okay.
not.
That didn't sound right.
No.
Okay. Is there any air emissions that come out of this thing?
Sure, there's air emissions. It's however a minor emission source, so the air impacts are going to be relatively minor. And just to give you a sense of how the federal government establishes guidelines, they take what they see as the air quality that would be safe for those who are most vulnerable in our community, the elderly, young people, people with asthma and other respiratory diseases, and then they establish a level that's well below that, which is the acceptable level of emissions. And so this facility will be below those levels, so it's going to have a minimal impact on regional air quality as far as.
This is like nominal operating conditions, then. The nominal impacts are not going to affect elderly people, children, that kind of thing.
Well, no, at full operating conditions, it will not affect people.
Well, I'm thinking about, I remember in somewhere, it was like near Owego, it was a couple of years ago, there was like a problem with some welds, and there was like a, I don't know, 5-mile, 10-mile stretch of the pipeline that they had to actually evacuate. They had to vent it. So I'm just wondering,
occasionally there's what's called blowdowns in certain areas. It's not a common thing, but if the pipe needs work, then natural gas will be exhausted from that section of the pipe. So obviously you can work on the pipe.
Okay, go ahead.
That's vented into the air. Unlike liquid fuels, it doesn't go into the ground. When there's a release of gas, it evaporates into the air and is dissipated in the air.
So that's what I'm thinking is, I wouldn't call a blowdown a nominal event. I mean, are there any additional health impacts when this First of all, is this site a potential place where a blowdown could occur? From
time to time, there may be blowdowns, yes.
So what about the health impact?
That's considered within the permitting regime.
That is a nominal condition.
Yes.
You engineer that to be, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Let me just think. So people were concerned about somehow they were making a connection between the air emissions and water quality. Do you understand what that's about?
I don't. There really shouldn't be any impact to water quality from this facility.
No impacts to water. Okay.
No.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
I remember maybe like a couple of months ago in Montrose, there was a compressor station that blew up. So my question is, just talk to me about safety in general and how.
Sure.
Like, how is that not going to happen with this one?
There are significant safeguards. As with any industrial facility, accidents can happen. But with these facilities, as I said, there's 1,300 operating, and it's very rare that there are examples such as you cited. In that case, that was a storage field with a compressor located at the storage field. There was a worker who was working on it and did not properly turn off the gas. There was a ignition of the gas. There were no injuries except that worker had some minor burns to his hands. Generally what happens if there is that unlikely and unfortunate event of an occurrence like that is the gas is allowed to burn off. The line is made so that if there is a drop in pressure, such as would happen in that case, the line cuts off upstream and downstream. The gas is burned off, and the main safety precaution is people are just kept at a distance. In this case, as with most of our facilities, we have a buffer. In this case, the footprint of this facility is about 2 to 3 acres, but we have a 11-acre site, so there's a significant buffer around the site just for that reason.
Okay.
In addition, we have yearly training that we do with local fire departments so they understand how to deal with safety issues. The facility itself is surrounded by a 7-foot chain link fence with razor wire around the top, has full monitoring, redundant monitoring, so that if one form of monitoring goes down, that we also have satellite links, so we can monitor it in that way as well. So it's a very safe type of facility.
How many people normally work at the facility?
There will actually be one person who works at this facility and along the pipeline, so there will not be somebody there permanently.
Not a full-time person?
No.
And then where is the remote monitoring going to be located?
I don't have the location offhand. I could get that for you.
Okay.
If you like.
I don't have any, I can't, is there anything you want to add or?
No.